This week, our topic focuses on food safety and technology. Food safety is really a moving target. The food supply in the United States is one of the safest in the world, but as the population increases and food suppliers or food supplies become more global, there are going to be new food safety challenges that present themselves. So new processes and new technologies are going to be needed to meet this demand and be sure to keep our food as safe. So in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, is the major agency that's charged with monitoring the U.S. food supply. And they have several ongoing areas of concern that they really focus on regarding the safety of our food supply. And we're going to discuss all of these in detail throughout the coming video segments. So one of these is going to be microbial foodborne illnesses, natural toxins in food. So we often think about toxins being something that are added or that we cause, but many foods have natural toxins. So we'll talk more about that as well. There are various residues in food or contaminants, and these could be environmental, they could be pesticide residues or animal drugs. Nutrients in food are also of concern with food safety. Intentional approval for food additives or approved food additives. So what is that and what does it mean? Why should we be concerned with that? And then genetically modified foods, and we'll focus on that as our controversy for this chapter. In addition to the FDA, so remember FDA is the main agency that governs the U.S. food supply and is worried about keeping it safe. There are other agencies that also monitor the food supply. These include the CDC, the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, CORE, USDA, and then the World Health Organization. But remember that FDA is the main agency. All right, so foodborne illnesses are caused by microbes, and a lot of times foodborne illnesses aren't really taken seriously, but they should be because they can be very serious and they can actually be life-threatening in vulnerable populations. And even in people that are not vulnerable populations, foodborne illnesses can definitely be life-threatening. However, vulnerable populations are going to be people who are malnourished or have decreased immunity. So they have a compromised immune system. People that live in an institution have an increased risk for foodborne illnesses, having liver or stomach issues, people that are pregnant, and then the very young and very old are also vulnerable for foodborne illnesses. We don't have to worry too much about foodborne illnesses in the United States, but they do happen. So we can get sick from our food. And we'll talk about the different places we can get sick from our food, from the farm to really our own preparation. So it's this whole segment of where these foodborne illnesses are coming from. However, the improved safety procedures in the United States have really declined the number of diseases that are associated with organisms, so that foodborne illness is not as prominent as it used to be. But greater efforts are still needed to continue the decline in illness. So there's probably always going to be some foodborne illnesses, but it's really important that we keep our food safe to continue this decline so we're not worrying about what we're eating, that we know that we'll be safe. So the first question we have is, how do microbes in food cause illness in the body? Well, microbes can cause illness by two ways. They can cause it through infection or intoxication. So in an infection, the microorganisms get past the body's defenses and then they infect the tissue and then multiply. So they just cause an individual to get very sick. Some examples of infectious microbes are salmonella, hepatitis, listeria, and the norovirus. So norovirus you might have heard about on cruise ships. This spreads very rapidly. So that would be an example of an infection. And intoxication, on the other hand, are microorganisms in the food that produce enterotoxins or neurotoxins. And these toxins are poisonous substances that can cause harm to the body. This harm can be something as small, which is still pretty serious, but on the end of stomach pain, but they can also cause death. So these enterotoxins and neurotoxins can be very serious. Some examples of intoxication or intoxicating microbes are Clostridium botulinum. So you might have heard of botulism, that's where that's coming from, or Staphylococcus aureus. So you might have heard of staph infection or staph intoxication. So you can check out table 12.3 in your book, which gives a better overview of some other major microbes that may cause foodborne illness. Also in Table 12.3, you can see major symptoms that are specific to various foodborne, to various microbes. Many of these symptoms overlap, so these are just some common general symptoms of foodborne illnesses, but each microbe can cause, has its own illnesses associated, or symptoms associated with it as well. So some common symptoms are bloody stools, dehydration, diarrhea lasting longer than 3 days, having a fever for more than 24 hours, headaches, numbness, muscle weakness, tingling sensations, rapid heart rate, have a rapid heartbeat, fainting, dizziness, and then severe intestinal cramps. So a lot of times people think that they may have the flu, and a lot of people get it, but a lot of times it could be related to something that someone ate. They could actually have a foodborne illness. So think about that next time. Maybe you went to a big family dinner and then a lot of people got sick. It wasn't the flu. You might have had a foodborne illness. So this figure demonstrates or summarizes the path that food takes from farm to table. So from the time that it's grown and then processed, it's transported, you go to the grocery store and buy it, and then you consume it. And at each point, microbes can infect the food supply. So something could happen at the farm, something could happen in the processing plant, something could happen during transportation, something could happen in the grocery store, and something can even happen at home. So our food can really be infected at any segment of this at any of these points. We'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, but focusing on the farm first, the soil could be infected by animal waste. There could be sick workers. In the processing plant, maybe there are microbes growing in the tubes, or again, someone could be sick. Transportation, if things aren't stored properly. Retail, there could be some cross-contamination. Again, storage issues. And then consumer-wise, we can infect our own food supply by not practicing proper food safety and food handling techniques. So we'll talk about more of these as we go along. I do want to mention E. coli, and you've probably heard about E. coli before, but may not know what it is. So several strains of E. coli can produce a dangerous protein toxin, which is known as the Shiga toxin. And there have been several of these outbreaks specifically related to tainted meat, raw milk, or contaminated produce. And some symptoms associated with E. coli would be bloody diarrhea, severe cramps, dehydration, and then very, very, very severe cases, hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is having abnormal blood clotting associated with kidney failure. So an E. coli, having E. coli can be very detrimental and lethal as well. And again, some common areas that E. coli has been found or outbreaks have been associated with are tainted meat, raw milk, and contaminated produce. Because of this, there is routine testing of raw meat by the FDA, and strict industry controls are really important for helping to keep the food safe and prevent these E. coli outbreaks. So E. coli can be anywhere, so it's important to test and make sure that the food supply is safe so that we don't have these contaminated food products. Moving on to the processing and even transportation piece of our farm to table, where is our food being infected? All food producers must have a HACCP plan, and HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. So this is a plan that must be developed and followed by all food manufacturers to prevent foodborne illness outbreaks at the source. So basically, this HACCP plan is identifying critical control points. So basically, any place in the whole realm of the food production that the food could become contaminated and there could be a microbe and then there could be a food outbreak. So basically, from simple as starting to store, maybe if I'm a vegetable farmer, storing my seeds properly, and then planting, and what do I use to fertilize? Do I use animal manure, or am I using a pesticide? All of those points of where there may be a risk for food contamination, and then devising and implementing ways to eliminate or minimize that risk. So, whether I'm checking my soil routinely to make sure that I have the appropriate level of microbes or there's no toxins in there. And these HACCP these HACCP plans have had great success in decreasing all infections in the food supply. We can also have foodborne illnesses or microbes infect our food supply at the grocery store. So generally, our canned and packaged foods sold at the grocery store are going to be safe, But, things happen just like with anything else. So it's important to practice grocery safety and when you're at a real retail store. So first, when you go into a store, you want to shop at a store that looks and smells clean. So if it smells bad, that probably is an indication that food is bad. Think about the same thing when you go out to eat at a restaurant. If something smells off or it's dirty, you don't want to eat there. Batch numbering and freshness dates or expiration dates, you want to check that on all of your products. Batch numbering is really helpful if there is a food recall. You know exactly what number they'll say, what number, and you can check that on, say, like your peanut butter, and know which one, if your peanut butter jar is one of the infected ones. So that's really helpful. Freshness dates, when is it still safe to consume this? If food looks damaged, you don't want to buy it. If a can is bulging, that's indication that there's a microbe growing in there. So you don't want that. For things that have that safety button on top, so think about like canned olives or jarred olives or other things like that. If that safety button, if you can pop it, that's bad. So it's like any canned food. You don't want, like if you're doing home preservation, that safety button is popped. Leave that one on the shelf or turn it into a manager. Frozen foods, you want to make sure that they're solidly frozen, so you don't want something that's a little bit thawed. You definitely want that to be solid. Look for ice crystals because that can indicate that something has been frozen and then thawed, frozen and thawed, and we don't want that either. So because you don't know how long was that sitting out thawing before it was refrozen. Reject cracked eggs, so you don't want to buy cracked eggs. Always check your eggs. And then shop for frozen and refrigerated items last. So you want those items to stay cold as long as possible. So you don't want to go buy your frozen and refrigerated items first and then go throughout the other aisles. And then by the time you leave, your food has been sitting out too long, and that could cause some illness as well. So be smart about grabbing those frozen, basically your cold items last. Finally, in this section, this one goes with both, being in a grocery store, but then when you have your food at home, knowing if your foods are expiring and if they're still okay to eat. So Table 12.4 gives a better description of all these. There's also a handout on the class Blackboard page, but the sell-by date just is specifying the shelf life. So the food is probably still safe for you to consume after this point, but it should no longer be on the shelf. The best if used by date indicates that the quality is going to decrease after this date. So after that date, the company will no longer guarantee quality, but it's probably still safe to consume as long as, it's been refrigerated or stored properly. Expiration date is the last day the food should be consumed. So you don't want to consume anything after that. And then the pack date will be used on items like fresh meats, or even like breads, things in the bakery part of the store, and this is going to indicate that the date that the food was packaged or processed. So check that out, and check what's in your cabinets at home, and know if your foods are still okay to eat. Check your refrigerator. This is always a very interesting thing and can be very confusing. So we'll see you in the next segment.